QuickBooks Pro Desktop 2021, new customer setup and accounts receivable beginning balance. Let's get into it with Intuit's QuickBooks Pro Desktop 2021. Here we are in our Get Great Guitars practice file homepage. We currently have the open windows open. You can open the open windows by going to the view dropdown and selecting the open windows list. We're going to be adding customers and related accounts receivable accounts for customers. We have a few different objectives when we add the customers. One is that we want to have the customers in place so that we can bill the customers, of course, when we create our invoices and when we create our sales receipts. Now, note that you can create customers as you go, as you create invoices and sales receipts. And therefore, if you don't have any customers at this point in time or you don't have the information for customers, you can then simply create the customers as you make invoices and sales receipts. We will see many examples of that as we go through the practice problem. However, if you have a list of customers already, we want to get them into the database program so that we make sure that we have all the relevant information. For the customers, unlike the vendors oftentimes, we want to make sure we have the more data related to them, meaning what's their mailing address? Do we have their email? Do we have their contact information? Maybe even some personal information about them that we could talk about, when we contact them on the phone or something like that, depending on the industry that we are in, because we want to be able to send them our newsletter and that kind of stuff. So if you have a list of customers, even if they don't owe you money, as of the point in time that you start your QuickBooks data file, you might want to take that list of customers and enter them into the QuickBooks system so that you have that detail in the actual QuickBooks system. If you are starting QuickBooks and you have some customers that owe you money at this point in time, then you also need to we want to enter the customer information so that we can then charge them in the future, but also need to enter the beginning balances that they have thus far. And we'll do that in our example here. We're going to say, for example, if we look at our trial balance, the accounts receivable here represents the money that is owed to us by customers. And that's going to be our beginning balance. So as we enter the customers, I can't just enter a journal entry saying, hey, I'll increase the accounts receivable by $20,500 because I need to know a sub-account for QuickBooks. It won't let me even do that because it's going to say, hey, tell me who owes you the money, because that's what accounts receivable means. And you need to give me a customer that adds up to that amount. So these are going to be our 3 customers that we're going to put in place, adding up to that $20,500. Back to the trial balance. Therefore, as we enter the customers, one of the fields we will enter will be the amount that they owe us at this point in time. So this is going to be our data input that we will have. Now, note that you might have some kind of Excel sheet. If you have some other database with your customers in it, then you can export oftentimes that database to an Excel file or a CRT file, like an Excel type file, some type of spreadsheet file. And then you can organize that information in similar categories as you will see it in the data input screen in QuickBooks, so that you can make your data input as easy as possible and basically just, rather than import it, we'll just copy and paste it into the data input screen as we saw with the items. So we got our relevant information. The only things you really need is going to be the name and then the beginning balances that we're going to do in the as of date if we have a beginning balance. But would probably want the other information, including more detailed name information, phone number, and contact information, would be nice to have in our database program so that we can, make sure that we're contacting them and sending them our newsletter and all that kind of stuff. So let's open up QuickBooks, and I'm going to go into the Customer Center now, which we can do by going to the Customer Center here, or we can go to the Customer dropdown, and the first item is the Customer Center. So let's go into the Customer Center. Now, the Customer Center will typically be laid out where we got the customer information on the left and then more detailed information on the right. All we have so far is our test customers so far. So I'm going to close this back out, this little window up top. And when we add new customers, we can do this a couple different ways. If we hit the drop down up top, we can add one at a time, or we can do multiple at a time. We're going to go to the multiple, but let's just look at the one at a time first, and then we'll see the kind of screens involved in it, and then we'll go to the multiple at a time. Now, the customer screen, they give a lot of information because you might want a whole lot of information on the customer screen here, but there's only a few required fields. The only thing we really need to enter the customer is the name. So if you're at the type of a business where you're working in a store and you're just making sales at the store, then all you really need is the name and the information so that you can collect a payment on it. Then that's all you really need. But if you're in an industry where you're contacting the customer a lot, Then you might want all their contact information. You want their email, you want their newsletter, you want to be following up with your, your email tracking and whatnot, maybe even some notes about them so that you can have some discussion points when you talk to them or something like that, right? So let's just tab through this. I'm going to say, all right, we've got the customer name, opening balance. That's going to be the balance that we're going to start off putting in. We're going to put that in as of the date, at the last day of the prior period. And then we got the company name, full name, the job or title, contact information, the phone number, email, and so on. And again, we may not have all of this information. Obviously, it's not required. But if we have it, we might want to put it in there, right? We've got the invoice and the billing too. So we got the invoice information, address down there, payment information, company number, credit card limit, payment terms. Again, these are not required fields, but just note that we want to know what is available here. So then we've got the credit card information down below, sales tax information. Default is all the customers will be taxable. That's what we have in our default. And they're all going to be the California state tax as the item. Then we have the additional information, customer type, and the rep, and then the job information if there's any job-related information. So let's close this out. And now we're going to see that same information by entering it in the advanced mode or the multiple customer mode. And this would be if we have a whole list of customers in a spreadsheet, as we do here, but we only have 3. But, same kind of. We're going to add the customers here. So we're going to do a same kind of thing that we did with the items. We're going to want to line up the data input up top. We want to line that up to the data input that's in our Excel sheet so that we can input the data as fast as possible and or simply copy and paste as we will do. So if I go back over to Excel, we can see what we have here. Now note that your names, if you're coming from a different database system, may not line up exactly. But you want to, whatever name you have in your database system, you just want to line, like the phone number might just say phone, right? And we want to make sure it lines up to the proper phone number. In Excel, we'll call it the main phone number. So you might just want to make sure you line up the billing address. It might say address from your database or something like that, something that has a different name to it. We'll call it bill 1 in Excel. The email could be named with the full, email in or the customer balance. So you could change those up, but this is what we'll have typically in Excel. So now that I see these here, I want to line them up to what I find in QuickBooks. So I'm going to go to the customize to customize these columns to what we have in our Excel worksheet. I'm going to customize them, and once again we see the information on the left and the right. These are all the options we have, and there's a whole lot of them. And we want to organize them by adding them or removing them and then moving them up or down so that the vertical top to bottom will match up to the horizontal left to right in the way that we see in our Excel sheet located here. So we want the name and then first name, last name. So let's do that. I'm going to say, all right, name, and then we have the first name. I'm going to move this up, move it up, and then the last name. So let's move that up. So we'll have those cells there, and then we're on the company name, main phone number. All right, company name, all right, and then main phone number. I'm going to move that up. I don't think I included the Mr. or Mrs., so I'm going to remove that. I don't think I have a middle initial. We don't have a fax, so alternative phone. I don't think we have that. Email we have somewhere. So let's see what the next item is. So then, let's see, we have the main phone number, the billing 1 email. So main phone number, billing 1. So I'm going to move that up. And then the email. So that looks good. And then we've got the customer balance and the as of date. So, okay. So CC, I'm going to remove these. I'm going to remove bill 2, and that. Okay, so now we have the customer balance. This is going to be the beginning balance, and then the as of date. That's going to be as of credit terms, start date, end date, and this is the one I want, the opening balance as of date. So the amounts that were put in there, we want them as of a specific date. So I'm going to add that, and there we have it. So I'm going to say okay. So now we've got our headers up top that should hopefully line up to, and we have this one, test client or customer in there, client customer. And that should hopefully line up to what we have here. Let's do just one data input just so we can see how the data input would work, and then I'm going to copy and paste it over. So I'm going to move this to my other screen. If you have two screens, this makes it a lot easier. And then I'm just going to do the data input here and just tab through this, and then we'll go back and we will just copy and paste it. So I'm going to say Anderson Guitars, and then first name is Joe, last name Anderson. Not sure if that's spelled like most Andersons, but Anderson Guitars is the company name. Main phone number 999-543-4241. Does it change the format? No. Let's go ahead and put a dash here. Let's put a dash there. The mailing address is going to be 9531 Heather Road. And this is a fake address, obviously, but this is a house for sale in Beverly Hills. All of our clients are in Beverly Hills here, 90210. California, 90210. And then we've got the email. So we will pick up the email then. It's going to be andg@gmail.com. That's a fake email, of course. Beginning balance 5,000. And then we're going to put this in as a 12/31/20, meaning that's the last day of the prior period. So I want to make sure to put it in as of the prior period before I start in the current period, because remember what QuickBooks will do is they're going to put this into accounts receivable, which is great. But the other side, where's it going to go? You would think it would go to like that opening balance account, but they might put it to like, because normally the form related to this is an invoice, and the other side of the invoice would be on the sales side of things. So they might hit an income statement account, which I do not want them to do in the current time period. But if they hit an income account with it and it was in the prior time period, then it'll roll over into equity anyways, and it won't cause a problem. So that's why I want to make sure on this one in particular that I have the date prior to the date that I'm going to actually be working with this, prior to the year in which I'm going to be working with this. So that if they do hit an income account, then it won't mess up my income statement in the current time period. Okay, so now that we have done one, let's go ahead and just simply copy this over. Let's do this again. I'm gonna copy this whole thing because it looks like it lines up right. I'm gonna copy that, Control C, and then I'm gonna put my cursor. I'm gonna try to overwrite this one. So I'm gonna put my cursor on this one and say Control V. And there it did it, overwrote it, and so there we have it. Everything lines up like it looks like it should. They're all as of 12/31/20 because our start date is going to be January 1st, 2021, so that's correct. So let's go ahead. I think that looks good. Let's go ahead and hit the save changes. It says that 3 customer records have been saved, so I'm saying great. That's good. And then I'm going to close this back out. And then in this screen, which you'll recall is our customer screen, drop down in the customer center, we now have our customer lists over here. And if I select any of the customers, we see the balance or the detailed information on the right-hand side, which is nice. If I go to the transactions, we can see the transactions. But I'm going to keep it over here on the customer side of things. Now, once again, if you wanted to change anything on one of these customers, you can go into them individually. I just double clicked on this one on Jones Guitars, and then you can make the changes that you need. So if I wanted to add some more notes, or if I wanted to include the ship to information over here, I can then add that information as is needed at that point. So I'm going to close this back out. Also, if you had any problems with that bulk input, then what you can do is you can hit the drop down and enter them one at a time. Drop down new customer, enter them one at a time. And the only thing you really need for the practice problem is going to be making sure that you get the opening balance as of the correct date, and that's in the name. So you really don't even need the address or anything else in order to work through the problem here. So if you have any issues with that and you just want to enter like the minimal data so you can work through the problem, then you'll need the name, you'll need the opening balance, and then you can add those 3 customers in that format. It's nice to have the rest of it because it'll show up on the invoices and whatnot, but it's not a required field to work through and just work through the numbers and see what is going on with it. So I'm going to open up this tab again. So we have our open windows open again. And now notice we entered these beginning balances. We should expect to see those on our reports now. So we're going to go to our reports up top, and I'm going to go to the company and financial and go down to the balance sheet. So on the balance sheet, and then I'm going to make the balance sheet as of 12/31/20, because that's when we entered the AR as of the accounts receivable. And so there it is. So there's our accounts receivable here. If I double click on that, so I tried to change the font size so you can see it here, but if I double click on the 20,500 to get to the detail, so we get to the detail here, we see our 3 customers. Now notice what they did in order to enter the data. It's not going to take us back to the data input screen when I double click on this. It's going to take us to an invoice, because that's usually the document that you make when you increase accounts receivable. So it's going to take us back to the invoice then. So if I double click on one of these items, it doesn't take us to the data input screen we saw. It takes us to an invoice. So it made an invoice, and notice the description. It said, hey, look, I just posted it, and it just called it opening balance here. So they made an invoice. So what does an invoice do? It'll increase the accounts receivable, as we saw. The other side will typically go to revenue, which is an income statement account, not where we want it to go. We'd like it to go to an equity account. But the income accounts will roll over at the end of the year. QuickBooks will automatically do the closing entries to equity. So it should be okay. So in other words, if I close this back out and I close this back out, you could see down here in the equity section, we've got 20,500 in net income, so instead of them putting it into opening balance equity like they did before, they put it into the net income here. So in other words, if I go to the income statement, reports drop down, or the profit and loss, company financial, profit and loss standard, and we change the date range to, let's make it the whole year, 01/01/20 to 12/31/20. So there's that 20,500. They put it into this, they made up this category of uncategorized income and put it into there. Now that would be a problem if this was in the current time period, because I may not have earned that money in the current time period. It might mess up my income. It might increase my income because it's the beginning balance, and I earned it maybe in the prior period. I already recorded it in the prior period possibly, but it's going to be okay for us because this 12/31 is in the prior period. And if I move this up to the current period, which is going to be the first, which is the year that we're going to start working in, then I can hit enter. There's nothing there. So there's nothing in the profit and loss in the current time period. So it's not going to mess us up in the current year that we're going to be working in, January through December. In this time period, all we have is the balance sheet account. So in other words, if I was to increase the balance sheet account up one more date, this net income will disappear and it's going to go into another equity account. So I'm going to say, let's bring this up to one more day up, which is going to be next year now. Now we're in the year that we're going to be working in, January 1st, 2021. And the 20,000 now changed to be an owner's equity. It's an owner's equity rather than net income. And that's good. That's where we want it to be. So we're good going forward here. So notice QuickBooks made this account correct. That's good. They dumped the other side into an income statement account because they used an invoice in order to create the accounts receivable. But that's okay because the income statement accounts will close out as long as we entered it in the prior year, the prior fiscal year, which is the calendar year for us, and it rolls into the equity. And so the equity will be correct once we enter everything in there, and then we'll just change a journal entry to get whatever's in opening balance equity into the proper equity account, and that'll be basically the end result. Now note that if you're entering the beginning balance somewhere in the year, because you're entering your data in the middle of the year and you had to put the beginning balance in there, then you're going to have a problem with the fact that you have on the balance sheet account in the prior period. Like if this was our current period and QuickBooks put in this 20,500 that shouldn't be there, well, then you'll have to do a journal entry to remove it. Meaning you'll actually have to do a journal entry to it would be a debit to this account and credit the equity account to put it where you want to in the equity account. But again, you don't need to do that as long as we entered it into the prior period. Note how also that the prior period here, when we look at our books, we're not using QuickBooks in this scenario to think about anything prior to the cutoff date, which is January 1st, 2021. Any data prior to that is in our prior accounting system, and so this data in QuickBooks will then be irrelevant. If you want to do anything before our cutoff date, January 1st, 2021, you're not going to QuickBooks, you're going to whatever prior system we were using at that point in time. Now, if I go back to the balance sheet report here, here's that 20,500. We can also break that number out in the subledger by who owes us the money. So for that, we're going to go to the reports drop down. We're going to go to the customers and receivable, and we can go to the accounts receivable. Let's go to the accounts receivable. Let's just do the summary. Accounts receivable. Let's go to the customer balance summary. All right. And then this is as of the current period. So there's our 3 customers. So there's the 5,000, there's the 7,500, and there's the 8,000 for the customers to bring up to the total, which is the 20,500. That amount should match, and this should always be the case. If I go back to the balance sheet in the open windows, that should match what's on the balance sheet. Now, also, of course, if we go to the Home tab in the open windows over here, Home page, then we can see once we create an invoice or a sales receipt, we will now have the customers that will be populated. If we were to simply start typing in a customer, for example, Anderson, it'll start to populate down here and it'll auto-populate for us as we go through that. So I'm going to close this back out. I'm going to say no, I'm not going to record that invoice, and that's going to be it.